the two trends were linked.
One of the great features of modern Britain is the public drift away from organized religion. This leaves people with a lack in their lives, and you could call it a God-shaped hole in their lives. And they're going to try all sorts of things to fill this God-shaped hole, including UFOs.
Blessed are the wise ones, for they walk through a dark and ignorant world, spreading their light.
One new cult that gained prominence in Britain during this period was the Aetherius Society. Its creator was a taxi driver called George King, who claimed he'd been visited by an alien.
When he left, I definitely saw him move to the side and a craft similar to this hovering above the ground, and there was a green beam of light came from the bottom here down to the ground, and he just moved to one side into the green beam and was gone.
During the 1960s, people became more and more open about disclosing their alleged contacts with extraterrestrials and flying saucer occupants. And of course the claims got more and more bizarre. Besides people who were just meeting them and chatting to them and receiving messages from them, you got people who claimed to actually be able to speak their language.
What does
that mean, actually?
That means, how are all you? I am very pleased to see you this afternoon.
How many languages can you speak?
I can speak altogether 3 of the space languages.
But for some, the subject of UFOs was serious business. In October 1967, one of the most famous cases occurred, involving 2 Devon policemen on a quiet night shift.
Devon's unidentified flying object, the 2 policemen who chased it in their car near Oakhampton early today, said later they're certain it wasn't an aircraft or a planet. They watched the object, a bright light in the shape of a cross, for nearly an hour.
Well, back in those days, I don't know whether it still applies today, but the traffic department would always be double crewed at night. And on this particular night, my colleague was either sick or on leave, and Clifford was a country bobby, and I went out and picked him up as an observer that night. And we're making our way back between Holmesworth and Hatherley when we saw this unusual bright white light in the sky.
What's that light over there? Over there, can you see it?
My view of it was that it was moving slowly, but I thought, as the way we were travelling, Rog, it would have been on our right when I first saw it. It was not a star, it was white. It was bright. It had, if you look at glass, which has got rain on, and you would see the same sort of inference that it's a splash.
I've never seen, I can't describe it, I've never seen.
We both registered that we'd seen something. It was something that we couldn't actually logically account for.
Well, there it is again.
We said, well, maybe it's going to go back up in the sky, but it didn't. It was just too eerie.
It was something that I haven't seen before, I haven't seen since, and something that nobody can explain exactly what it was.
Whatever appeared in the sky that night prompted interest from a much higher level. The 2 police officers were called back to their station to explain their sighting once again.
I've never seen anything like it. It's so bright.
We were visited by a boffin from the MOD who told us that we were still officers under the Official Secrets Act, and they would rather us keep it to ourselves.
The new outbreak of sightings forced the Ministry of Defense to find a new approach to the whole issue of UFOs. In response to continued UFO sightings in the late 60s, Britain's Ministry of Defense issued a detailed briefing regarding the media's influence on the increasing number of UFO reports.
When popular interest is stimulated in UFOs, people look for UFOs. Indeed, they wish to see them.
Another sign of the times was echoed in an official memo to the Defense Secretary. It simply stated that it is now becoming fashionable for people to see UFOs. Flying saucers, UFOs, and aliens began to invade popular culture, often linked with hallucinogenic drugs like LSD.
From the mid-60s onwards, you have what would have to be called a sort of LSD consciousness permeates the whole of the counterculture side of British society. And you get it in the songs of the Pink Floyd, of Jimi Hendrix, of Mark Bolan. All these bands incorporate LSD-inspired imagery, which involve dancing gnomes and flying saucers and ley lines and mystical experiences.
That's when really you started to get these sort of spin-off movements that actually went out and, you know, were actually looking for them, and, you know, they took their sandwiches and their flasks and they sat out on a hillside and looked for objects.
As if to cement pop culture's love affair with aliens and flying saucers, a new nightclub in London's Soho became the most fashionable place in the capital. It was simply called UFO.
The idea of it was to trip people out, and that was the whole idea of the secondary name, the Night Tripper. Now, a lot of people think that UFO meant unidentified flying object. It did, but it was also underground freak-out. It didn't necessarily mean, you know, there's a spacecraft with an alien in it. The thing that was alien was in your head.
As people spent such a lot of time taking drugs and smoking pot in those days, different ideas emerged, and one of which was that ley lines must have a function, one of which was thought to be as a sort of energy source for flying saucers. And this was why there were so many sightings around Glastonbury and Glastonbury Tor, was that this was a major connection point for, I don't know how many, a dozen ley lines or something, and so it was like a gas station, you know, they would come in and get charged up and off they would go. And a huge number of people would go from the King's Road off down to Glastonbury, and quite a lot of them did see flying saucers.
But space exploration had now reached a pivotal moment. NASA's Apollo program made history in July 1969. Just as predicted by President Kennedy, man took his first tentative steps into a new world.
The 1960s is a period of a belief in science and technology. Once science fact has overtaken science fiction, then inevitably people become interested in other things. But the science fiction, it doesn't really bear a relationship to the science fact once we've seen pictures from the moon. They no longer look quite the exciting places that films back in the 50s or comic strips such as Dan Dare and so on had really visualized them to be.
In the 70s, official UFO sightings continued, but were largely unremarkable until 1980.